Hello, it's so good to see you here. I know it's been a while since my last video, so if you've forgotten who I am or you're new here, my name's Ka-Lok Ho. I'm a director and consultant, and I help creative businesses grow their brand and develop their content, and sometimes I like to speak quite fast. So today I'm doing an AMA and Ask Me Anything, and I have my laptop here with a bunch of questions I've collected over the year from commonly asked questions from my clients or from you on social media or at events and workshops. If you'd like to ask me a question, you can just hashtag AskKa-Lok on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, send me a DM, send me an email, send me a smoke signal, and I'll eventually get to it. So let's get into it. What makes a successful marketing campaign? This is a pretty big question, but if I was to pick only one thing, it would be to have one goal and one aligned message across the entire campaign. If you can't look at an advertisement or a piece of content and immediately understand what the message is and what they're trying to get you to do, then it wasn't very effective. I've worked on campaigns and received briefs where they've wanted to fit in like 10 different messages. And the problem with that is the more things you try and say, the more diluted each message gets. So you need to have just one goal and understand what that goal is. So what are you trying to do? Is it a brand awareness thing? Is it a conversion and sales thing? Are you trying to create interest? And then once you've decided that goal, decide on what one message you want your customers to actually take away and walk away with. After you've got that, you need to decide what you want them to do with that message. So what's the call to action? To summarize that, have one big goal, have one message, and then have one call to action. The analogy I like to use is if Game of Thrones can't satisfyingly wrap up a bunch of different character storylines in 8 seasons, do you think you can tell 5 different messages in a short marketing campaign or a 30-second pre-roll ad? The next question comes from one of my coaching students, Ola. She asks, is there a difference between community and audience? Yes. Next question. No, yes, there is a difference. And I'm going to throw in customer into that community and audience equation as well. So let's try and break it down a bit. All businesses have customers, fewer have an audience, and even fewer have a community. The customer relationship is very transactional. Through advertising and marketing, I pay you to pay attention to me, and then you pay for my services, and then that's pretty much it. That's that. With an audience, they are willingly turning up for you, and a community, they are basically a collective audience. Community is sometimes also called a tribe. Seth Godin has a whole book on this, which I highly recommend reading. The main difference between a community and an audience is that as well as turning up for you, they are turning up for each other. They have shared interests, shared values, and shared beliefs, and because of that, they can start influencing each other quite drastically, and they can attract more people. You can be part of these tribes as well and have influence, but to do that, you actually have to turn up and be part of the community and actually contribute. The mistake that a lot of brands make is that they think they can sponsor an event without turning up, and that's their contribution to be a part of the community. But that doesn't work. That's basically just advertising. That's basically just putting up a huge flag at an event saying, hey, we're here, but we don't care enough to actually be here. It's the same difference as if there was a political rally or a protest going on and you saw it on Twitter. You could easily hit like and retweet, but you're not having the same impact, and that's not really doing anything compared to the person who actually turned up and have boots on the ground and they joined everyone else in the rally. So if you want to build a community of your own, you actually have to be part of the community and actually engage. So the difference between the customer and the audience and community relationship is basically the same difference as a buyer and a true fan. So you can spend your entire career chasing customers, or you can try and build an audience and then they end up chasing you. And wouldn't that be so much nicer? What comes first, the product or brand? Let's quickly define what a brand is, otherwise this is going to get quite confusing quite quickly. So the common misconceptions. A brand isn't a logo, it's not the colors you use, it's not your tone of voice, all of that is your identity, and a brand is not your product. The definition that I like comes from Marty Neumeier, and he says, a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they, your customer, says it is. A brand is a person's gut feeling towards a product, service, or company. So what comes first, the product or the brand? The brand comes first, or more specifically, the customer does. Typically, startups, when they're beginning, they have a great idea for a product or a service and they start running at making this thing. But a lot of the times they didn't check if there was a market or customer that actually wants this, and the person they're actually creating this thing for is themselves. So they may have just made a thing that no one actually wants, and by the time they realize that, they're usually too far in and they end up trying to retroactively fit customers into the product. Whereas if you spent time figuring out who your customer was first, and then you understand what their needs are, what their problems are, what exactly they're looking for, everything else kind of falls into place. You know exactly what your logo should look like, what your colors should be, how you should sound, and what products or services are going to be a hit with them because you know exactly what they are looking for. So this image here that I've also borrowed from Martin Neumeyer illustrates this whole idea the best. On this first wheel, back in the day, there wasn't so much option or so much choice. So companies could just create a product or a service, and that's basically what their brand became. Customers would buy that product, and that sustains the company. Whereas nowadays, the great brands are closer to what this wheel represents. The companies create the customer first. They understand who their customers are, what they're trying to achieve, what their problems are, and then providing a solution through their products or services. And then the customer, then they create the brand. Because as we said earlier, a brand is not what you say it is, it's what they, the customer, says it is. And then through their customer advocacy, the brand is sustained and that keeps the business going. If you'd like to learn more about this, I would really highly recommend reading Martin Neumeyer's book, The Brand Flip, as well as the other two in the series, The Zag and The Brand Gap. How do we tell our brand story? This is one of the most common questions I receive from companies and clients. And as a director, I've been asked a couple times to shoot brand story videos where we talk about how the business got started, how they got to 5 or 10 years in, what they do, what they're all about, and why they do it. And I have mixed feelings towards this whole topic. I mean, in that equation, just the only bit that was important is the why they do it. I mean, I have mixed feelings because does it really matter? Does it really matter how they got started? I mean, do we really care how Nike got started or how Apple got started? Or is what we actually care about just what it means for us, what they can do for us, and how it adds to our own story? Some startups really do have really interesting backgrounds and stories, and if that's the case, I would say yes, lean into that as much as possible. But typically it's a tale that we've heard too many times before. It's the two friends who had an idea for something and there wasn't a solution on the market, so with no money they started this thing on their mom's kitchen table, and the rest is history. But we know that story, we've heard it a million times, and we probably have a story that's very similar to that. So that's not that interesting, and that's not going to set you apart. The thing that is interesting about the story is your purpose, the why of the business. Aside from making a crap ton of money, why did you start the business? What's the purpose? What are your values? What's your personality? These things are interesting, but that story isn't told on your company's website's about page or a talking head video for LinkedIn. A lot of this story is going to be told with every interaction and every experience your customer has with your business. So every customer touch point, from a press release, how they interact with you on your website, what it's like buying from you, what it was like speaking to you at an event or dealing with your customer service, or how your accounts people speak to your largest business accounts. All of those things are going to add to the whole story of your brand. But nowadays, a lot of this story is going to be told through your content. Even if you don't offer any sort of try before you buy service, nowadays your customers are trialing your brand through your content. They're seeing where you are active. Are you even active? What type of things do you publish? Are you responsive? Are you helpful? All these things give them an idea of who you are and what you're all about. The analogy I like to use is that content should be like serialized media, a lot like comic books or soap operas. So if you've never read a comic book in your life, you could go out right now and pick up an Avengers or an X-Men comic book, and even if you haven't been up to date for the past 70 years of that comic, it's still quite an easy jumping on point for you. So you could flick through the comic and you'd have a good sense of the story, who the characters are, what they're all about, what they're trying to achieve. But if you've been up to date and you're an avid reader, you get something a bit different. You get more character building, you get more story, you get more personality, you get a lot more development. And your content should be doing exactly the same thing. So every piece that you publish is another piece of brand development to the story for your customers. So everyone else who has been along for the journey with you since the start, they get another piece to add to the puzzle. and people who are brand new to you get to discover you and understand you for the first time. So content is where your personality and your whole story should shine nowadays. What do most startups miss when building a brand? This is a question that I received when I was on a marketing panel for startups, and at the time I don't think I answered it that well, but now that I've had some time to think about it, I think it comes down to three things from my experience. Startups typically misunderstand the role that brand is supposed to play, or at least they don't have an agreed definition. 2, they're not starting the brand process early enough. And 3, they're not spending enough time to understand their customer. So if we were to break these things down, not having an agreed definition on what brand is supposed to do or misunderstanding what it's supposed to do, brand, as I said before, is not your logo, your colors, your tone of voice. That's your identity. There's a lot of contention between brand and marketing a lot of the times because marketing is very metrics based and it's very logical and it has a process and it's very quantitative. But brand a lot of the time can seem like this intangible mumbo jumbo thing that you're trying to sort of mold. But that's not the way I see it. Brand and marketing and social media and content, in fact, they're all under the same umbrella of marketing. They're all a family. They're all a close brothers. If the function of marketing is to be known and get a new customer, then the function of brand is to keep that customer. If you want that in business lingo, then marketing is customer acquisition and branding is customer retention. It would be weird to do one without the other. If you did marketing without branding, that would be like having a bucket with holes in it and you're constantly trying to fill it with water. There's like no use in doing that. If you have a business without marketing, then you won't have customers, which means you won't have a business. If you don't have customers that are willing to stay, then you don't have a brand. So the brand is the long-term game that you are trying to play. So number 2, startups not starting the brand process early enough. This is quite similar to the question I answered a bit earlier about whether it should be a brand first or the product first. So again, a lot of startups, they can end up creating a product without checking if there was an audience or a market for this, and they're actually creating for themselves. But sometimes this product is actually great and they can run off this high for a good few years. But nowadays, when it's so easy to become a Me Too offering, soon, typically around 2-3 years in, someone comes up and starts competing with them who can do it better, who can do it faster, who can do it cheaper. And then the original brand starts panicking because they realized, oh, actually they had no legs to stand on. They never defined a purpose. And something that I see a lot nowadays are brands that are hiring storytellers to come in and craft a story around the brand and around the product because they never did that at the start. And nowadays, when it's so easy to become just another Me Too offering, brand is where you can differentiate yourself. So you need to start the brand process as early as possible and understand your whole purpose. Number 3, not fully understanding the customer. This is the biggest misstep that I see most startups having. They're a bit unclear and not sure what to do next because they're not entirely sure who they are talking to. When you spend more time focusing on your customer and you really know who they are, what they're trying to achieve, what they're trying to do, everything else really kind of falls into place. But a lot of companies are very me-centric. It's about who we are, what our values are, why we do what we do. And they may have even done Simon Sinek's strategy circle, the how, what, why approach. And they may have even worked with a brand strategist who has gone away and come back with a couple values, a slogan, maybe a handful of customer personas. But then sometimes you look at this deck and you're still stuck. You don't know what to do next. And in those cases, it's because you probably didn't define your customer's why. The intersection between your customer's why and your brand's why, that little gap, that little section where it overlaps, that's where your brand should thrive and that's where your brand should live. When you focus all your efforts on who the customer is, everything else kind of falls into place and it becomes a lot easier. After you've spent a lot of money and time investing and growing your business, it can be hard to hear that actually you're not the hero of this story. You're just the supporting act. You're just the sidekick. Your customer is the hero. But when you can make that switch in your head, you understand your role and what you have to do in supporting and helping your customer. How do you come up with better ideas? I think to first come up with better ideas, you have to come up with more ideas. And to do that, you just got to make a lot of stuff. And a lot of that stuff is probably going to be crap. And that's okay. You got to get through the crap to get to the good. As Ira Glass says in The Gap, you're going to be bad when you start off. But as long as you've got killer taste, eventually by making more stuff, that gap is going to close. And I know for myself at least, all my best ideas always started off as the worst conceivable idea possible. But with a bit of massaging, bit of finessing, it becomes okay. And from there, you just keep going, keep publishing, and keep making. I'd also recommend that you probably ditch your first idea, because your first idea likely isn't that original. It's likely the idea that everyone else came up with first as well. I recently did a brainstorm and 3 or 4 people all arrived at the same concept at the same time, and it was the first concept. And what that tells me is that wasn't original at all. It was the obvious low-hanging fruit. And if you want to come up with better ideas, you got to start looking at a lot of different things that are unrelated to your industry. If you're working in design, don't just look at design, look at a bunch of other things, have different interests, start cooking, start skiing, start reading a book, take up an instrument, learn close-up magic, do something totally odd. If the definition of creativity is connecting 2 dots to create something original, then you need to start collecting more dots and looking outside of your industry. If you only look inside of your industry, you end up just making the same sludge that's already out there, that's been done a million times, and you unconsciously start remixing things that you've seen in your industry, and it all starts looking the same. And I think that a key thing to developing more ideas is actually you have to publish these things in public. You have to let other people comment on it. When people start commenting and you start creating conversation, these lead to better ideas, more iterations, and just better ideas in general. So publish more, look at different things, and make crap work. How did my first job lead to what I'm doing now? My first proper job was in retail. I worked for the brand Superdry for about 9 months, I think. The way I got that job was kind of interesting. I used to have a long break on Wednesdays when I was in college, so I would always visit the shopping mall, and I would always stop off at Superdry just to have a browse and see what's new. One time I was with my girlfriend and she asked me a question about one of the t-shirts or a bag or something, and I answered with such knowledge about the product that it almost seemed like I work there. So then for some reason I said out loud, quite loud, you know what? They should just hire me. And then a week later I handed in my CV, and long story short, they hired me. And then I found out the reason they hired me was because they recognized me. They saw how often I would go into the store, and I think they heard me. So I don't know what the moral of the story is there. I guess it's turn up constantly, get known, and say what you want. I don't know. But I don't really see any connection between that first job to what I'm doing now in brand content marketing consulting and creative direction. In many ways, I consider my first real job that led to this is filmmaking, which is still very much my first true love. I did go to university and study marketing, and I absolutely hated it. In my 2nd and 3rd year, I barely turned up. In fact, in my 3rd year, every single week, I would receive a letter from the university threatening to kick me out because I only turned up for 1 month of the entire year. But after graduating, I needed to confirm to myself that this whole marketing shtick just wasn't for me. So I ended up getting a job in a marketing office, and I did it for a whole 3 days before I quit and said, yep, this absolutely sucks. This is not for me. Peace out. So all the time that I spent not attending my lectures and not studying and not attending my classes in university, I actually spent self-studying filmmaking. I got my hands on everything filmmaking related. I've tried to learn as much as I can online. I used all my money on film gear and equipment and teaching myself how to light sets, how to record professional audio, how to use cameras, how to direct talent, and pretty much how to tell a really good story. So long story short, after the 3-day marketing job, I threw myself into filmmaking and I became a director. But I was never actually that far from the whole brand marketing and content side of things, because the things that I was directing and producing were ad campaigns, branded content, web shows, editorial content. So I saw in the real world how marketing actually worked, and what I discovered was it's totally different to the outdated theories and techniques and the things that they teach you at university, and it was not the admin crap that I was doing in the marketing office either. And I've always been a bit of a strategic thinker. I've always wanted to know how the content that I was directing and producing actually performed for the brands I was working with. And it was there where I really got my hands-on learning of how to build a brand, how content affects brand, how content builds relationships with your audience, and combining that with my creative direction and filmmaking side. That's kind of how I fell into what I'm doing now, where I consult for brands. How is my background helpful in my current job? So with the background in directing and filmmaking, I can see so many parallels between film and brand and marketing. It's all just storytelling, and marketing is just successfully delivering a message to get people's attention. And I think there's no better crash course in learning how to do that than in film. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is show, don't tell. Show me why I should care about your character. Show me why I should care about your brand and business. Don't tell me. When someone tells you on screen in a film why you should care, it's boring exposition. And when that happens in a marketing campaign, it just doesn't come across as very genuine or authentic. Being a director has taught me a lot about collaborative working and leadership as well. How I think the best leaders and best directors can always do a bit of everything that their team can do. They don't have to do it as well as them, but knowing just enough to speak your team's language is so valuable in leading and working together well. Another big lesson I've learned in film that parallels in marketing is how important good story or a good strategy is paired with amazing execution. The analogy I like to use is just look at the new Lion King. It's exactly the same story as the original animated version, but the execution is different and it just pales in comparison. So I think my background in filmmaking has taught me so much about brand content and marketing, and I think a lot of the analogies I like to use, as you can see, fall back into filmmaking. How do I align teams and stakeholders? I have several creatives and I want them all to feel free to do their own thing as they're the experts, but how do I align them and keep everything feeling the same and together? I think there's quite a simple answer to this, and I think you might be missing someone that I like to call the translator, someone who understands how to speak in business objectives and translate that into a creative output. Usually this person is a creative director of some sort, so they understand how to take business goals and communicate that in a way to their creative team that they can create an output that achieves those. It's important to have one clear vision and have one person to decide the final decision. It's great that you want to let your team play, but it's important that you are the one that creates the parameters and the sandbox that they can play in, so you have a aligned result. A lot of junior creatives especially see themselves as artists, and they are trying to create a great piece of art, but that's probably not what you're looking for. And if everyone on your team is looking to create a great piece of art, what you're going to end up with is a smorgasbord of a result that isn't going to achieve your business goal. That's why I say it's so important to have someone who can speak the language of both business and creative, a translator that can translate business objectives into a creative brief for your team to follow. How do I educate my clients to tell them that their videos suck and it's not very good? My work is so much better. How do I let them know that? This is a funny question because I totally see where they're coming from. And when I first started out, I felt very much in exactly the same way. This is a question that I received when I did a portfolio masterclass, and it was a very common question. But I'm going to change the question a bit just so it's a bit more relatable. So instead of videos, it could be logos or website design or whatever current solution that you currently offer for your clients. So how do I educate my client that their current solution sucks? The answer is you don't. No one wants unsolicited advice. No one wants to be told that their work sucks, and no one wants to be told that the work that they have paid for sucks. This question usually comes from someone who is only judging their work from a creative standpoint, and they're not really taking into consideration the business's perspective. So this crap video, as you say in your opinion, might be getting results for the business, and if that's the case, then it's not a crap video. Artistically, yes, it might be, but if it's getting results and it's doing what the business wanted it to do, then it was actually a good video. I mean, corporate talking head videos are usually really boring, but corporate businesses love it. It's simple, it does the job. I mean, you might be able to come in and light it better and add some dramatic camera movement, but is that going to raise their bottom line? Is that going to take more time to produce? Is that going to cost more to do? If so, that's probably not what they're looking for. But this question ties very well into the next question. How do I get better clients? How do I get more clients? And how do I find my dream client? That's the big golden question. It's a simple answer, but with a more intricate explanation. So let's tackle a few myths first. Do the work and people will come. That's a total myth. It's not what you know, it's who you know. That's definitely not the case. If it really was about who you know, then you would already be successful. Do better work and you'll attract better clients. Okay, I agree that doing better work is important, but that's definitely not enough to get more clients. Doing good work is really not enough. You have to be doing the other 50%. What's the other 50%? The other 50% is getting known, is marketing, is getting out there, getting in front of your clients and getting on their radar. The hard part isn't doing the good work, because everybody apparently has good work nowadays. The hard part is getting seen and getting known. It's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. So how are you doing that? Are you fishing where the fish are? Are you going where your clients go? Do you even know where your clients go? Do you know where they look for information? Do you know where they hang out? Do you know where they frequent? Are you going to the conferences that they are at or the events that they go to? Are you trying to speak at those events? Are you publishing content? Are you publishing helpful articles and videos or podcasts? Are you trying to be seen? Does the work on your portfolio look like the work that they publish? Is the work on your portfolio the same caliber of quality that they have published in the past? If you want to find dream clients, you've got to help them find you. Again, it's not who you know, it's about who knows you. Ben Richard asks, do I have any filmmaking tips about audio, lighting, or editing, or any production tips? I love this question because, as I said before, filmmaking is very close to my heart and I love talking about it, but I've avoided talking about it too much because I feel like this question has been answered a lot by everybody else on YouTube before, but I'll go through 3 quick tips that I think is helpful for anyone starting out in video, or if you want to create videos like this. So, number 1, the saying goes, audio makes up 50% of your image. So what that means is we can tolerate quite a bad image if the video is pixelated and it's tiny and it's potato quality, but the content and audio is good. We can tolerate that. Whereas if the audio is bad, it feels like our ears are just bleeding and people are not interested in that at all. So invest in a good mic before you invest in a good camera. Number 2, find yourself a nice big soft light source. You definitely don't need all the stuff that's going on here. This is just excessive filmmaker BS that you really don't need when you start out. All you need is one big soft even light source in front of you to expose yourself correctly. If you don't have any lights, you can just sit next to a window in the day and that pretty much does the same thing for you too, especially if it's overcast like in England. Number 3, an editing tip. Cut the fat. Cut your video as short as possible. It's really easy when you're shooting yourself to just babble on and go on forever. But in editing, you have to just keep cutting all the fluff. In a film, the first cut is usually 3-4 hours, but then the theatrical cut that you see in the cinema is usually around 2 hours or even 90 minutes, because there's so much fluff that just isn't necessary, that you didn't know that you needed, that you didn't know that you didn't need when you was on production. So in editing, cut out everything that's unnecessary. At the start, it's going to seem difficult. It's going to seem like I need this to be in there, otherwise the video won't make sense. Give it a day, come back, and just keep chopping, and you'll end up finding that the shorter it is, the more succinct the message is, and the more interesting the video actually becomes. So I hope those 3 tips help. Okay, so that brings this first AMA to a wrap. That was a lot of fun. If you want me to dive any deeper into any questions that I went through, just let me know in the comments below, or you can leave me a comment and let me know what you would like me to answer in the future. If you want to connect with me on social, all the links are in the description. And if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. So I've been Ka-Lok Ho, and I'll see you in the next one.